Hi, this is Gary Sheffer from the Hudson Area Library and specifically the History Room. And we're going to do another History Room on Zoom today. Our guest is Gail Wittwer-Laird. She's a principal in the Starr Whitehouse Landscape Architecture firm and director of Starr Whitehouse Hudson. Gail and her firm, the reason I wanted to have her on the History Room on Zoom, are involved in several projects at historic sites in Hudson that you all will recognize. She's an award-winning designer who's built projects in New York City, include the Irish Hunger Memorial and the Bleecker Street Seating. Gail worked for New York City Park for 18 years.
You did the math.
Yes, working on projects such as the restoration of Riverside Park. We're going to talk to Gail about plans and designs for the new Promenade Hill Park, which opened last month and which I run through pretty much every morning, as well as 7th Street Park, or Public Square, as it was known back in the day, and the historic Dr. Oliver Bronson House. Gail, welcome to the History Room on Zoom.
Hello, thank you very, very much for having me. You've touched on some of my favorite places.
Yeah. So you've worked as an industrial designer, is that right?
I
In
did.
Europe?
I
Eh,
did. I started, I studied in Italy as an undergraduate, and I caught the Italian bug while I was there and ended up going on an extended leave of absence and working for an industrial designer there. But I think that's where my interest in historic landscapes was really solidified, kind of loving how they really add to the richness of experience in contemporary landscapes. So, yeah.
Right. And then obviously I just mentioned your work in New York City. How did it all lead to being here in Hudson and working on these projects?
Well, I think I'm originally from California, actually, and I had a fellowship through the Harvard University's Graduate School of Design. It was a community design fellowship, and I was working in New York City for a nonprofit. And I became very interested in New York City parks and how filled with history they are.
Absolutely.
The roots of the Olmsted landscapes that are so much part of New York really began here. So I found it to be a really rich place to be a landscape architect, and never left. And well, the story to the road to Columbia County, I mean, this is the truth. My husband and I had a tiny railroad apartment in the East Village near Tompkins Square Park.
Okay.
And we had two boys, and we were like, we need some leg room. And so we bought a house in Columbia County, in Hillsdale, and so been coming to Columbia County with the kids since 2007. And we had friends who lived in Hudson, and loved coming to Hudson because it was so well, not entirely kid friendly then, but the parades, right? Who
Yeah,
doesn't
exactly.
who doesn't love a parade, right? The fire parade, winter walk, these became kind of defining moments of our year. And so Promenade Hill, obviously, and the 7th Street Park, which you mentioned, are such important public spaces for Hudson, and where people come together and celebrate. It's, these two spaces are the beginnings and ends of the parades, right?
Exactly. Oh, I love parades.
Yeah.
I'm a big parade guy too.
Yes. And Promenade Hill was a parade ground, no less.
That's right. So let's talk about Promenade Hill. And I know you have some illustrations from your work on the park, which will be a first, by the way, on the History Room on
Oh,
Zoom.
good.
I
Well,
don't think we've ever had visual aids here, but it sits for everybody. It sits at the base of Warren Street, which I guess would be the west end of Warren Street. And as I recall, this land was granted to residents of the city by the proprietors. It was called Parade Hill,
yep.
right? And in 1795. So, can you tell us anything about the early days of this bluff overlooking the river?
Well, I think, the fact that the proprietors made it a public space at the beginning of the founding of the city is extremely important. This is very early for public spaces. In New York City, Bowling Green, I think, is maybe one of the oldest
That's right.
parks in the country, but this is very, very early. So it kind of highlighted their understanding of the importance of the scenic landscape. They realized that this is that the Warren Street is on this kind of promontory, and that this view, this sense of place was really important, and that it wasn't built on, and that it was preserved for the public, I think is a really interesting fact with the founding of Hudson, and that those two spaces were developed somewhat simultaneously as public spaces was really forward thinking of the proprietors. Yeah.
I mean, I'm so happy that you have as your background that beautiful postcard of Promenade Hill looking southwest toward the river and the lighthouse. It's really,
Yeah.
really beautiful.
Yeah. So I'm going to share screen, and you can keep asking me questions.
Yeah.
And
So
I'm going to share the screen. I have what I have to share as visuals is actually the presentation that we gave during design to the Historic Preservation Commission, just describing some of the research we had done and what were the design criteria that we had been given for the design of the park.
And you'll go through it, Gail, but as I was running through the park the other day, I did see the last time it was refurbished or renovated, whatever you say about a park, what's the right word, was 1975.
Yep.
And that was done with support, Hudson DPW and Hudson JCs, and I even think the American Legion was involved. But you'll cover all that. I'm sort of spilling the story here. Why don't you go ahead and share your screen and show us some of the history?
Okay, here we go. So can you see my screen okay?
Yeah, it looks great.
Yeah, so actually this is one of the earliest views of Promenade Hill. It's a painting by Airy. And what you can see here is there's no railroad yet, and a view of Mount Marino, and this just wonderful window into the early days of Hudson. And I think this is just such a spectacular, it's been a spectacular view forever, which has drawn people to the waterfront here. So this is an early painting of Promenade Hill. We came to the project actually because the city received a downtown revitalization grant.
Right.
And this is the first project of the grant program. And really the whole purpose of the grant for Promenade Hill was just to make it accessible. But as designers, we want to leverage as much as possible. So one improvement can spill into many others. I think if it were just to make a ramp, the space needed so much more. So what we wanted to do is see how we could use the fact that you needed to make it accessible to improve that whole lower area.
Okay.
And this is a really important diagram here. So this is on an aerial photo. So in green, this is the area of the historic promenade that was established in 1795. Warren Street used to go all the way up to the base of the promenade, and there was a staircase there. So in the 1970s, the buildings that were along Warren Street were demolished, and the street was cut off back at Front Street, and they did keep the old firehouse. So this whole area in orange and red is what was done in the 1970s. And
during the urban renewal projects,
yes,
that went on.
Urban renewal. That's a different presentation. And so, what it is really interesting that it literally hadn't changed since 1977, I believe was the year. And so I think, there had been talk about things over the years, but no one could agree, no money, this and that. So finally, this is pretty significant change, and knowing how long it takes between changes, we felt a great need to get it right. So the biggest challenge is, going up this from, elevation 62 up to the promenade of 77 in a fairly short stretch. So
is that feet, Gail? I'm sorry to interrupt. Does that mean you have to go up 15 feet in a very short area? Okay.
Yeah, 14 and a half feet over a fairly short span. So here's some existing conditions photos that we took before we started, and you can see, you know, the pavement is in not such great condition, and it's a little worse for wear and tear. A view down Warren Street. Haven't looked at these in a while, but you know, the park was really not in very good shape. There weren't very many benches. This corner, I think, used to have a piece of play equipment, was gone. And yet, when you got to the top, it's still pretty magical. Here are some more images, actually, courtesy of the history room, talking about its earliest formation as a parade ground. It had a lot of different names, actually.
So those are the different names.
Yeah, or
listed.
military companies that would come there to do their parades. Yeah.
And Gail, what's the building in the background?
Actually, there was a house. There were houses up here.
Okay.
Before they were
Beautiful.
torn down. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful houses.
But the extents of the park are really the same as they are today, which is pretty spectacular. So here actually is the view that I have as my background today, which I really love, because you know, there was a fountain. St. Winifred wasn't just a garden, she was a fountain, and you can say kids playing in the fountain, people sitting in benches looking at the water, and it gives you a window into another era of time, but you know, a pretty delightful one. Yeah.
Can we talk about St. Winifred for a second?
Sure.
Was there any thought given during this restoration to restoring it as a fountain?
Yeah, so you know, I think it does come up in conversation.
Yeah.
And I think it would be a good idea, but it's a question of, you know, the funds to do it properly, and then also having the means to maintain a fountain. You know, fountains need to be winterized and cleaned, and you know, I think her time will come. I'm optimistic. She's still in pretty good shape, unlike Venus, and yeah. So
and didn't someone at some point, maybe I'm mistaking this, at some point someone stole her sword in years back. I think
I don't know that
there was a story, but I could be wrong, but I seem to remember that. If I'm wrong, I'll put it in the comments. But anyway, it's a beautiful statue, and now it's, instead of a fountain, there's a garden surrounding it.
Yeah.
Terrific.
Okay, I'm just gonna let Chris know. Maybe we can bring Chris in at the end. So yeah, so there's St. Winifred, and right now, as you noted, it is just a garden, but it would be nice to have water back. She was added in 1896 to the park, so about 100 years after the park was founded. Here's some images actually from right after the urban renewal project was built. And you can see there's a kind of merry-go-round, which was removed. You saw in the photos later.
Yep.
The trees are young here, and you know, the staircase and the lights, which is basically how it looked until a couple of years ago.
Right.
So these are pretty interesting images of the park when it was first built. And as part of this process, actually, we did some community outreach. We wanted to see, you know, how people felt about the space and used the space, and explain to them the goal of the project to make it accessible. So that's where we began. That's actually Chris Anderson, who's an associate in the office, who helped put the plans together. We had a lot of different versions of this. Some were more curvilinear, some were more rectilinear. We always felt there needed to have the plaza at the foot of Warren Street, like we talked about earlier, so that there's room for the parade activities or community gatherings. So the plan we came up with is kind of a hybrid of these two. We ended up with the oval plaza, but a more condensed ramp. And there's pretty close to what we built. I think when we were designing it, we took inspiration from the Upper Promenade, in that the simplicity of the landscape. You know, it's just really open lawns and trees and a beautiful view. And so, you know, bringing more green to the street level was very important. So as much green and trees as possible. So we planted a lot of new trees and did some open lawn areas, and then having the plaza kind of open up to Warren Street and to the neighborhood. So it's like the upper promenade opens up to the river, and now I say lower promenade, but the lower park kind of opens up to the city. So you have the park really has this dual relationship to the river and to the city. And so we wanted to kind of, better knit the park to the city. I think I hadn't got, when I first moved here, I didn't go up for
exactly.
A lot of people didn't know it was there, or,
Right.
it was so uninviting. Like, why would you go in that space? And so only if you knew the prize at the top of the hill would you go. So hopefully it will give people more access to the top of the hill.
I was going to say that to me is that's the best thing about it. It is inviting when you're at Warren Street. And now, for example, which I never used to do, when I'm in Hudson, I do my Rocky run up the steps.
Oh, I love it.
Into the river, which I seriously, and I go around the promenade to take a look at the river. So it's changed my habits.
Oh, that's great. I love that. That's your Rocky stairs. That's a good set of stairs.
Yeah.
And they're very solid. Actually, I'll go, one of the other things that was really important to us is the kind of materiality of the promenade. If you're not going to do things very often, make them out of permanent materials.
Exactly.
And so we wanted to do, so we chose Onondaga limestone as this light colored pavement, and bluestone for the steps. So that you really have this sense of permanence. Like I said, making it greener, and so that's more or less what we've built. I wish we've talked about maybe thinking of doing some other things over here in this parking area, which is somewhat underutilized. And we also did add, you can see kind of up here in the corner. Actually, it was Tiffany who said, you got to do something for the kids. There used to be a spray shower over here in this corner of the park.
That. Yeah.
So we did a new spray shower within the playground popper, and it has a whale pattern at the bottom with an arch. And so it's not on right now, but in the spring there's a spout and a little whale.
That's fantastic. I'll have to go take a look. I usually turn left when I get to the top of the steps and look at the lighthouse. That's fantastic. So this opened last month, right? And end of 2 years. Gail, what's the reaction been, other than mine, about my running? What's the reaction been to the
so far? I think people are, some people, took a long time. Yes, but we waited a long time.
Yeah.
We did get a donation. The original park wouldn't have paid for the stone, and so the Van Amerigen Foundation and Colarusso actually contributed a good amount of money to make sure that the project could have stone. And so, these things took a little longer, but I think it was worth the wait. So I think people are really happy about it. We did add more lighting as well.
I saw
along the ramp, so that if you're up at the promenade during dusk and you come back down, it's well lit. So I think, it'll only get better over time as the trees grow. One of my favorite, here we go. One of my favorite trees actually I planted there is a ginkgo tree, and it's they will, over time, they're small and scrawny now, but over time they will become beacons at the end of Warren Street. It's an extremely tough tree, and I just like the stone, we wanted trees that can withstand extremes of temperature. They're very pollution resistant because they have very small stomata, which are how trees breathe. And so I said, let's choose, and they can live to be 1,000 years. So
wow. Well, let's hope that this project lasts 1,000 years. Along with the trees. So you mentioned Public Square at the other end, or nearly at the other end of Warren Street, and you're working on that as well. Now there's a Friends of Public Square, right? Supporting that project. So where does, I know there've been several design scale. Where does that project stand?
So we did just some early concept designs. I have to credit, I think the FOPs, we call them the Friends of
Yeah,
Public Square. They've done a really terrific job of leveraging support for the public square. In fact, they call it, on the old maps, they call it Public Square. It wasn't called the 7th Street Park, which I think
right.
that alone kind of tells people about history
Yep.
by bringing back the place name. They hired a surveyor and did an accurate base map of the park. They've done some public outreach to see what people wanted to do. So we came in after they'd already done a good amount of groundwork and just came up with some early concepts for renovation of the park. I could probably even bring up one of those if you wanted.
Sure. And so are you still in the design phase? I know there was some voting,
Well,
right?
we're still in the design, very much so in the design phase, just to get some early concepts on paper to help people imagine what it could be like. I mean, similar to Promenade Hill, it hasn't had a lot of improvements to it for many years. So
Yes.
the pavements aren't in such great condition, and the landscape is a little tired. So so it's, how can we bring it back into the limelight of the city rather than having it feel a little left out or left over. And I think the other key part of that is for the public square, 7th Street Park, you have to have the water, right? Like it had a big
Yes.
fountain in the center, and that would be so wonderful to bring back.
Yeah.
It was such
You
yeah.
you can't talk about 7th Street Park without the fountain coming up within like 30 seconds, right? People
Right,
have
right.
have opinions on it. That's where Venus was, right?
Yes,
Was in that fountain, and
yes.
she disappeared, and in
Yeah,
tough shape, right? She's not as in good
very
shape as
tough shape. Yeah, they had moved her. So you mentioned, I think it was the Kiwanis Club, the
the JC's
the
back.
JC.
Yeah, yeah.
So actually, the fountain that's there now, or that functioned most recently, was donated by them. I think
Ah,
in the
okay. Or Kiwanis, maybe. It could have
Yeah,
been Kiwanis.
Kiwanis,
Yeah.
yes. And so Venus was moved at that time when they redid the fountain, and she was at the corner of 7th and Columbia, and she was too close to the road, and she got hit by a car.
Okay.
And if you look on
Ooh,
the Gossips of Rivertown, there's some good, and do Venus
okay.
7th Street Park. There's a very detailed
History of,
essay just on Venus, if you are
okay.
so inclined. So yeah, so we want to bring back the fountain, renovate the park, and give it the care that it needs for the
When
next century.
when just as a ballpark, not specific, of course, when might work there begin? Do you have any thought?
Well, unlike the Promenade Hill, that park is not yet funded. So I
Okay.
think part of what the drawings and things are to go after some state grants. And that will take some time. If there are any private donors out there who would like to help get that park started, I'm sure Pops would love to speak to you. Um, and yeah, so I mean, I do have a couple of images that I want to share on that one, some of my favorite ones from the history
Okay.
room. We're talking about the fountain. I'm just going to share my absolute favorite image. Um, and this
So,
is going to dovetail into your question about the Bronson House. So I'm
okay.
just going to do full screen here. If I can share my
And
screen one more
Gail,
time.
while you're doing that, I can comment that the history room is such a treasure trove,
Oh my
isn't it?
God, I love it. I love it. It
It's,
is a treasure trove. It's really a treasure trove. So
oh, wow.
this image is from the history room, and these are two teachers from the New York Training School for Girls, and this is in the mid 1930s.
Wow.
And like, what a picture, right? Doesn't that
Yes.
just this building is still there. Here's where the gas station is now, but there's the fountain, the trees, and it just
Wow,
it's a really, really wonderful image. And
that's
yeah,
fantastic. That's
yeah,
fantastic. Wow.
yeah. And I have one other image in here that we were talking about how Promenade Hill and the public square bookend the city. This is actually a plan from 1838. So here's Promenade Hill, and
Yeah.
there's the public square.
Wow.
And in terms of postcards, this was a very photographed space. I think, oh, here's a photo from the 70s.
Oh,
Venus
that's
is still in
yeah.
the middle.
That's my
Uh,
era, Gail,
yeah, there you
when I was
go.
in Hudson. Yeah.
There you go. Um, so actually not in bad shape then. And
Exactly.
Venus is still in the middle. Here's one from a snowstorm,
Yep.
more or less in that same era. And then here's just a couple. This is actually another one of my favorite views from the Roll. This is an image from the Roll studio that you also see in a lot of the postcards. So
Wow.
looking back, there's the train depot, and it's
Wow.
a very simple design. And I hope that the new park kind of maintains that simplicity, but acknowledges, the use that it'll get today. So those are just
Yeah.
a
And
few images um, of the public square. Yeah,
and you have the challenge of a railroad line through
indeed.
going through the
Here's
park.
there you go.
Yeah.
It's been a challenge for a long, long time.
Eh,
So here's the route of the railroad that was put in fairly shortly after the park was built, and is still there. And as I think people have noticed recently, they've gone in there and dug up the tracks. So yes, still there.
Okay. Now you say it's connected to the Bronson house. How so?
Well, let me go back to here and then I'll stop sharing. So these two women were teachers at the New York Training School for Girls. So that is where the correctional facility is now. It was a school for girls. And so the Bronson house is on that property. And we've been working with Historic Hudson on the idea of transforming that parcel into a public park. And it's a 160-acre parcel. It's all owned by the state. And so in order to make it a public park, obviously there needs to be coordination and, what
With the
happens
state.
with the correctional facility, what
Yeah.
happens with the state, but the correctional facility is 40 acres and there's 160 acres there. So what about that other 120 acres, right?
Right.
And it's publicly owned. So why not think about it as public space?
And the house itself has been stabilized now, right? It was vacant for many years, but Historic Hudson and others
Yeah.
have stabilized it to the point where some restoration work can be done. And your focus is on the landscape, I would
Yes.
assume.
Yes.
Excellent.
Exactly. Exactly.
And that was the home of Dr. Oliver Bronson, if I'm remembering right.
Yep.
And just a beautiful, beautiful um, structure.
Yeah, no,
So
they do open houses, keep your eye on Historic Hudson. They do a couple of times a year they'll open up the house and they
yeah,
get permission to use the carriage drive. We did an open house there 2 years ago now. And it's really fun to see that landscape and imagine, it's just there used to be a bridge actually
right.
connecting down 7th Street next to the railroad. To your left, there are a series of ravines, and there was a bridge that took you across the ravine right into the Bronson property. So
Into the property.
just imagine what Hudson would be like if you had a little bridge and suddenly you're in this beautiful natural landscape. I mean, it would be transformative. It would be like having a Central Park in downtown Hudson.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's already great, but it could be even better.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. Well, I really appreciate you talking with me about these sites. And it really is amazing the transformation at Promenade Hill. It's really inviting and accessible, and I just really love it. And it does tend to. I see more people up on top of the
Hmm.
promenade than I
Oh, great.
have in the past. And so, congratulations on that project. good luck with the others.
Thank
And
you.
and thank you for being on the History Room on Zoom.
Oh, thank you so much for doing this. This is terrific.
Oh.
Really enjoyed it. And I love the history room.
Terrific, terrific.
Okay.
Thank you so much for saying
Okay.
that. All right,
Okay.
Gail.
All right.
Take
Take
care.
care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Let me stop.